Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our fourth day of the International Education Week. For all the students that are joining us during this event, I just put a message in the chat box. If you have a professor that is offering credits in the class, please feel free to fill out the survey. We're going to start with, I'm going to start actually introducing our UCF Global Associate Vice President, Natalie Chandia, to give the opening remarks for this event.
Thank you, Sergio, and welcome everyone to day 4 of International Education Week. As I've said throughout the week, it doesn't really feel the same because we're not there. We can't say hi, we can hug people, we can, but I'm happy that we've been able to come together as a community throughout the week. I'm hearing echo, sorry.
Sergio, and welcome everyone to day 4.
I'm hearing myself talk in the back. Can you still hear me? Yes, okay. So anyway, so welcome students, welcome to our panelists, our distinguished panelists. Thank you for being with us. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Fernando Rivera. He's the director of the Puerto Rico Research Hub and a professor in the College of Science and also part of our UCF Global team. His work has been going on for years, and it's our pleasure to have him here because I know how passionate he is about what he does, and it makes our community better. And we're trying, and he's trying to create awareness about our community and the Hispanic community and challenges we're facing. So it is my pleasure to leave you with him. And please join us in the rest of the events today and tomorrow. So thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you everyone that is in attendance. Today we have a spectacular panel. And if we can see the next slide, please. I think it's a little cut out here, but here's sort of the panelists that we're gonna have. But before we do so, we have Luis Martinez, Alicia with the City of Orlando, Zoe Colon also from UCF and other community groups. And we have Luis Martinez Fernandez, Professor of History here at UCF as well. But before we begin, and I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the panel and what I'm asking participants to do, I wanted to give you sort of a context out here in terms of what does this mean in terms of Puerto Rico and the relationship here to UCF and also the Central Florida region. Today is coincidentally the November 19th, which in Puerto Rico, they celebrate the discovery of Puerto Rico. So it's a holiday out here. So, you know, we didn't plan it, but it falls on a very significant day for Puerto Rican as well. So if you can see, Puerto Rico and Orlando are roughly separated by 1,200 miles. But the connections are a little bit deeper out here in terms of that. If we see the next slide, we've seen that there's a significant movement of population outside of Puerto Rico and into the continental United States. And you can see, sort of, if you see the timeline out here, you can see that while the population of Puerto Ricans in the continental United States continues to grow, the population on the actual island of Puerto Rico tends to decrease. What we know, if we see our next slide out here, is that a lot of that growth has happened here in Florida. So you can see from 2006 and onward, we see sort of that migration or movement of Puerto Ricans to Florida, and specifically the Central Florida region out here. And we have the benefit here as a community, if we see the next slide, that Florida continues to attract a lot of Puerto Ricans to here. And basically, if you can see, you know, sort of very briefly some of the numbers out here, but there are other states that continue to grow, but Florida now has the highest concentration of Puerto Ricans of any of the states in the continental United States. So that's just a very brief overview of sort of what is the importance out here of Puerto Ricans, of the Puerto Rican community, which, you know, in a sense, right now we have this exercise where we're trying to learn more about the community and the impact that it's having here in Central Florida. But that means also that eventually we'll have to do the same exercise for other communities that continue to grow in the Hispanic Latino community that we have here in Central Florida, including Venezuelans, including Dominicans, including different people from Central and South America. But that's enough about me and my lecturing. Now I want to turn the panel over to Luis Martinez Alicea. And basically, I'm asking each participant about 10 to 12 minutes just to basically talk about the role and experiences as a leader in the Puerto Rican community in Florida, and basically discuss any current projects supporting the Hispanic community and share some success stories with the audience. And this is, you know, sort of the guiding questions. We have had discussions beforehand, so feel free to add other themes that you think are important to discuss in this panel. So I'm going to turn it over to Luis Martinez Alicea from the city of Orlando.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, UCF Global and UCF Puerto Rico Research Hub, for inviting me to be part of this virtual panel. It is an honor to participate. I serve as the Deputy Manager of Multicultural Affairs and International Affairs for the Mayor Dyer's Office of Multicultural Affairs. The Office of Multicultural Affairs was created by Mayor Buddy Dyer in January 2012 to create strong communication bonds with our growing and diverse multicultural community. And the best way that I can describe the role that I play in the City of Orlando government is through the following 4 components: communications, Hispanic community outreach, international affairs, and cultural events. Communications, I serve as the mayor's spokesperson to the Hispanic and multicultural media. I translate all the mayor's talking points, press releases, and media alerts into Spanish and send it out to Hispanic media. Also, I coordinate all the Hispanic media interviews with Mayor Dyer, city directors, and officials to talk about city services, programming, and community events. Also, we manage the city Hispanic Facebook account, and we are so proud to be the only local municipality in having a Spanish social media outlet. Also, we provide recommendations to our communication team on translating the city webpage, newsletter, and any other official documentation into Spanish to serve our growing Hispanic and Puerto Rican population in Central Florida. The second component is Hispanic community outreach. We create awareness in the Hispanic Latino community about city services, programs, and community events by participating in local activities, bilingual panel like this one, workshops to talk about any type of service, including business assistance programs, incentives, how to be part of the city boards, volunteer opportunities, events, and more. We build and maintain strong relationship with the multi-ethnic Chamber of Commerce, professional associations, and community relationship through partnership. And also, we provide recommendations to the mayor in the implementation of city policies, initiatives to foster diversity, inclusion, and equity in the city government, as well as to identify the opportunity for mayor to continue engaging with the Puerto Rican and the Hispanic community through his participation in local events. The other component is international affairs. I coordinate cultural events and host the visit of international delegation from the Latin America and the Caribbean and from other part of the world to City Hall. These are delegations from elected officials, ambassadors, consuls, that are interested in learning about how the local government works. Also, investors that are pursuing to expand their businesses and corporations to our region. We provide them detailed orientation on business incentives for foreign companies to establish in the city of Orlando, and we connect them with our community partners in Central Florida, such as the Chamber of Commerce and other entities that help these foreign businesses to establish in Central Florida. Also, we manage our Sister City program. The Sister City program is an international partnership that fosters economic development, cross-cultural exchange, and global cooperation. Currently, the city of Orlando has 9 sister cities, including 3 Latin cities, Valladolid, Spain, Monterrey, Mexico, and Curitiba, Brazil. As we know, the city of Orlando plays a major role as a world-class community, hosting many international visitors and delegation dignitaries and national, state, and local leaders. And our sister city program is part of this, our city continued efforts in promoting the city of Orlando, not just to be a destination for tourists and visitors, but also to foreign companies that are pursuing to expand their business to our region, as well as to establish diplomatic relationship with the city government. Cultural event, the City of Orlando coordinate and host a diverse of cultural event in City Hall that allowed our community to gather together to celebrate our differences while we continue solidifying the city relationship with residents, community organizations, and leaders, including the Hispanic Heritage Month, Black History Month, Asian Pacific Heritage Month, among other multicultural activities. Talking about the Puerto Rican community in the city of Orlando, after the Hurricane Maria, 250,000 Puerto Ricans arrived to Florida, the largest evacuation on this scale in the history of the state. Among 50,000 Puerto Rican decided to stay permanently in Central Florida since the hurricane back in 2017, meaning more Puerto Rican businesses are expanding to our region. So when the Hispanic, as our Hispanic and Puerto Rican community continues to grow, many businesses are considering to expand to Central Florida, including Puerto Rico-based companies, including Titan Products, El Mesón Sandwiches, Mi Cosecha, Ana Jiménez University, Polytechnical University, Inter-American University, Casa Febu, Novus, among others. So the growth of the Puerto Rican population in Central Florida has a direct impact to our local economy because Puerto Rican entrepreneurs are expanding and establishing their businesses from the island to our region and help us the city to create jobs and diversify our economy. Since the Hurricane Maria, the OLA office, Hispanic Office of Local Assistance, has played a critical role in providing services to Puerto Rican residents and newcomers. The OLA office was created by Mayor Dyer more than 15 years ago to provide to residents, newcomers, and businesses cultural competence and bilingual services in terms of the city services, programs, and community events. The OLA office connects residents and newcomers with more than 100 government and community organizations to find jobs, healthcare services, education opportunities, and other resources. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, representative from the OLA office has been committed in providing bilingual orientation to residents that are losing their job, that they are looking for affordable housing, and any type of service from local government, as well as services that community organization offers to them. The OLA office has an array of community partners, including Careers of Central Florida, Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration, Working Together Coalition, Goodwill of Central Florida, Catholic Charities, among other entities. OLA office, after the Hurricane Maria, OLA office provided services to more than 6,000 Puerto Ricans and remains committed to continue providing this high quality of services to Puerto Rican and Hispanic residents that are pursuing to have a quality of life with their families by finding new jobs, the best public schools, colleges, among other services that we provide. We are so proud in the city of Orlando to continue fostering inclusion, diversity, and equity by establishing multiple city policies, ordinances, and initiatives that help the city of Orlando to continue engaging and collaborating with our city residents and community organizations. For us, it's so important that our Puerto Rican community see the city of Orlando as their friend. Mayor Dyer has been diligent enough to recruit Puerto Rican professionals that are holding key positions in different cities and departments, including myself, Ana Cruz at the OLA office, Manny Soto as our emergency manager, and other Puerto Rican and Hispanic leaders who are fluently in Spanish and are able to provide a high quality of bilingual and cultural competence services to the Puerto Rican and Hispanic community. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the City of Orlando has implemented several initiatives and programs to help our businesses and residents during this time of crisis. The City of Orlando created a dedicated webpage that offer information on city response to the COVID-19. And this website, orlando.gov/COVID-19, is available in 5 languages, including Spanish. We continue sending through email our city newsletters in English and Spanish. Also, we provide updated information through our city Facebook account in Spanish, facebook.com/Ciudad de Orlando is complete in Spanish. So our Hispanic residents feel welcome, engaged, and informed about all the city services and resources that we are providing to them.
Thank you, Luis, for all that information and sharing us today. Now we turn it over to Zoe Colon.
Hello, hello. Saludos a todos. Thanks so much for this opportunity. Zoe Colon, I currently work at UCF. I work on community partnerships in the Paramore community, predominantly Black and Black Caribbean community, some Hispanics in that area. Very proud to do that work and very involved in the Puerto Rican and Hispanic community. I have a pretty diverse background. I worked 10 years with a predominantly undocumented immigrant community in New York. I have 20 years experience in the nonprofit sector. So that's really where my expertise lies, but I am in academia now and I've actually taught Latino studies in New York. And, you know, I now in Orlando, I've been here just about 6 years and have been very involved in the newly arrived diaspora movement, if you will. But I come from New York, where we have a pretty established diaspora, generations and generations of Boricuas in New York. I grew up in the Bronx. You know, El Condado La Salsa, that was like pretty much all Puerto Rican. But I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood, Black, Puerto Rican, other Latinos. But that richness of my background, I think, provides a lot of insight and perspective when it comes to looking at the Boricua diaspora here in Central Florida, right? I come from a place up north where we have institutions, you know, we have political power, we have congresswomen from the Puerto Rican community, you know, Nida Velázquez, others. We somewhat have, you know, established or accomplished to acquire economic power as a community. There are cross-cultural and racial alliances up there that exist that I don't necessarily see here, or that they're just starting to develop here. So it's just always interesting when you come from the North and a more established diaspora, if you will, versus coming into a place where folks are relatively newly arrived, and looking at the differences and similarities is always interesting to me. So I came here 6 years ago with the Hispanic Federation. I came to help mobilize and build capacity in the Latino community. That's what I'm dedicated to. And, you know, when you look at, you know, established epicenters of, you know, receiving epicenters of Boricuas, of you know, Puerto Ricans in our history, you have Chicago, you have New York, New Jersey, and some other places. And when you look at Central Florida, this is relatively new in some ways, right? It's a new and fast growing city in its own right. perhaps not a Chicago and not a New York yet, in various different, facets of its life. But it is fast growing, and one of the fastest growing in the nation, hands down, right? So Orlando's fast growing, Kissimmee is as well. And, the aesthetics are that this is like the Browning of Central Florida, right? So for a long time, I think Florida, being part of the South, has operated in a kind of black-white dichotomy. And so, politically, politics, who sits at the table has always been a black and white matter and a struggle, right? So it hasn't been easy. But we are still fighting for a place at this table, right? So, there's no question, Orlando, Kissimmee, Tampa, Miami, parts of Miami, Jacksonville, we have significant number of Latinos, but also, with the exception of Miami, predominantly Puerto Ricans, right? And so what we're lacking, what we're not seeing, at a fast enough rate, is our power, and economic power and political power match that presence. So aesthetically, we have the Browning of Central Florida and other parts of Florida. We have, a significant number, an influx of Puerto Ricans, and in some cases in Miami and other places in South Florida and Tampa, it's decades and decades, right? These are not necessarily newly arrived, it's somewhat more established, but we're dealing with the fact that these are relatively new cities that, again, being in the South, the conversation has always been around black and white communities, and that we're just kind of becoming noticed, although we've been here for a while. And so aesthetically, here we are, but now we need to be at the table politically. We need money to be designated and awarded to Puerto Rican and Latino-led institutions. We need more representation in office and in leadership positions. We're blessed to have someone like Luis Martinez, who's unapologetically an advocate for the Hispanic community. He's everywhere, right? And so that presence is important, because if you don't see yourself, you don't know that you matter. It doesn't, help kind of legitimize the importance of your community, right? Unless you see yourself in these institutions. So to see a Luis Martinez, to see, the OLA office, those are important institutions and important strides in our community, right? But there's so much more work to be done. And so, we need to be a priority, on issue agendas locally, statewide and nationally. And, even in the last election, we were missing, we were invisible from those agendas, right? And so that's what we need to build. And so, because we haven't been part of the table, as they say, you risk being on the menu, which is what most people will say, because decisions are often and will continue to be made at our expense if we're not at that table, right? We're not part of that conversation. But what we are doing is we're building our own tables, right? So you're not at that table, there's no space for you there, there's no place for you there, you build your own. And so I think that we've had significant wins in Central Florida, in the Puerto Rican and Latino community. I am going to focus more on the Puerto Rican community because this is the topic at hand today. So as Luis started to mention, we have a fast growing business community, a ton of Puerto Rican, businesses, small businesses, right? The chambers are pretty strong. We have a Puerto Rican chamber. We have the Hispanic Chamber of Central Florida, Metro Orlando. And that's a really important institution in our community. And there are a lot of Puerto Rican business owners that are part of that chamber as well. We have Prospera. So we have a really strong business community that's fast growing. The nonprofit service sector industry, if you will, is getting there, right? So the Hispanic Federation is a national organization that now has roots in Central Florida. We have Iniciativa Acción Puertorriqueña, which I do a ton of work with. We were very involved in responding to the needs of families after the Pulse massacre, Hurricane Maria, earthquake and other climate refugees and their needs, responding to their needs. We've had some wins in that, Hispanic Federation, Iniciativa Acción Puertorriqueña, and some other Latino-led organizations now have, county grants for a long time, especially when I first got here just 6 years ago, I kept hearing the same thing. Well, we're not receiving money from the United Ways. We're not receiving money from the local county and city, government. So how do we build that credibility as institutions if the local folks will not fund us, right? And how do we get funding at the state and national level if we can't have our own local government support us? or even local foundations, right? So, so we're in a good place. You know, we're starting to work with other institutions that are considered more mainstream, like a Career Source, Valencia College, which is a Hispanic serving institution, and so is UCF. But those relationships are just starting to be solidified. But it's a big win for our community, right? Because, you know, for example, like with Iniciativa Acción Puertorriqueña, when Hurricane Maria happened, we served over 500 people. We offered, you know, basic human services and, you know, advocacy and, that kind of service, but we also offered English classes. And so we hired someone, tiny organization, you know, hired an English instructor, and operationally, it's just a lot of work, right? So now we're at a different phase of our organizational life, if you will, as a nonprofit institution, where we have a partnership with UCF Global, and UCF Global has the capacity to offer that instructor, and we work together hand in hand. We pull our resources, and it's just much more effective, cost effective, and just makes much more sense than a tiny organization trying to run this entire program, right? So that's the importance of those kind of collaborations, which I'll talk about just a little later. But you know, just going back to some of the wins, you know, we have a fast growing number of nonprofit organizations that are Puerto Rican led. So I mentioned Hispanic Federation, Iniciativa Acción Puertorriqueña. We have Alianza Center del Ambiente, Latino Leadership, which has been around for at least 15 years, right? So they're not new, they're kind of the veterans in this area. Legal Services Clinic, which is with Anthony Suarez, you know, serving the Hispanic community, the Puerto Rican community, and that kind of sprung up after Hurricane Maria. We have Hispanic Family Counseling, and between these organizations, they're providing cultural events, mental health, LGBTQ support to newly arrived communities. And then recently, as I mentioned, you know, there's at least on projects that I'm working on, we're focusing on workforce development and economic prosperity in the Puerto Rican community, because we have been hard hit by this pandemic and the resulting economic recession, right? So we have thousands and thousands of people who've been laid off from the parks and the service sector, and that disproportionately affects our community, the Puerto Rican community. So and I'm getting chills as I say it, but this is a you know, for me, something that I'm very passionate about right now. And so building those coalitions with Career Source, with Valencia, with UCF is so important for our community right now. And so, you know, I do my best because I'm involved in different county boards and with different institutions, and I have, you know, some connections at UCF to be able to capitalize on those and bring attention to some of the needs in the Hispanic community, which has been largely ignored for a very long time. We can't forget the faith institutions, right? They are usually the first and only point of contact for a lot of families coming from Puerto Rico. So they're an important player in serving the Hispanic community and the Puerto Rican community. They provide a ton of basic human needs through, you know, food distribution events, clothing events, shelter in some cases, and a ton of assistance. We have, of course, the civic engagement, right? So oftentimes, especially in election cycles, what you will hear is like a ton of money is being poured into voter mobilization and getting Latino elected officials in office. So there is a ton being done here, particularly because we're in the I-4 corridor. So, you know, and you could argue that some of that funding really needs to go to more services and leadership development, so that when elections come around, you have a pretty strong and powerful base, right? But they're definitely, all eyes are on I-4 corridor and the Puerto Rican community when it comes to these election cycles. So undeniably so, we have a ton of voter mobilization programs. We have Alianza for Progress, Boricua Vota, Respeta Mi Gente, Poder Latinx, Mi Familia Vota, Unidos, formerly NCLR, National Council of La Raza. So we do have some infrastructure when it comes to institutions. We're still lacking funding, right? And in academia, we have, of course, the Puerto Rico Research Hub. And we've had in the past, you know, FIU has a center that publishes around, you know, Puerto Ricans and you know, our strengths, our needs, and other scholarly topics. We have El Centro Estudios Puertorriqueños out of New York that has always had an interest. You know, anyone that has an interest in Puerto Ricans is going to look at Central Florida, and that has supported the hub, you know, in different ways. So, so I think that we're making some progress, right? You know, I will mention that we recently had a small win in our community here in Orlando. We had the renaming of Jackson Middle School, which was named after a Confederate soldier Stonewall Jackson, and the community, you know, pushed and pushed for years. This was over at least 10 years. So this was not, you know, recent, but it was recently won, right, this battle. And we changed the name of the school to Roberto Clemente Middle School. And that's a huge, huge win in our community because it's the first school in this area to be named after a Latino icon. And so for me, it's a huge win because you really can't strive to be what you don't see, right? And so that presence and that visibility is really important in our community. So I'll just end with, you know, I think Puerto Ricans have a very complex history, right? And so sometimes that impedes in coalition building, right? And I think coalition building is so important if you want to build political power. It's important so that other people can understand your history, who you are, your place in society, if you will, and your potential to grow. And, you know, just a lot of misconceptions, right? So there's some tension even between Puerto Ricans and other Hispanic groups where they're like, oh, you know, our history is so different. You guys have citizenship. As soon as you get to the US, you have all these benefits. Even if you don't ever come over to the stateside, you know, you have access to US goods and jobs. And, you know, if you go to the island, there's a lot of American culture there and commercialization. But we have a very complex history with the US, you know, without getting too political, you know, we have been exploited at the hands of the US historically. We don't have full constitutional rights. And if there's any doubt about all of that, you know, I think that we failed Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. There's no denying that, right? And so I think that that second class, the notion of being second class citizens, really, I think there was some light, you know, that came, you know, around that issue after Hurricane Maria and some of the climate refugees after the earthquake. So, you know, we lost nearly 5,000 lives, and just no one can deny that could have been handled differently. So I think that Puerto Ricans are now, you know, a little bit more conscious of where we are politically, you know, our status as, you know, as it is right now, the relationship to the US and wanting to be more involved, right? And as we, you know, court, you know, newly arrived folks, I think we really need to invest in, you know, their well-being. And so that's why I'm so passionate about the nonprofit sector work, right? Because you really can't engage someone politically, you know, unless you really understand, you know, where they are, meet them where they are, and invest in them, right? And in that relationship. And so I think we need to invest more in the nonprofit sector and folks that are really engaging year round, like the City of Orlando, the All Out Office, and all these nonprofits that I've been talking about. And so as far as the next phase of our, you know, the development of our community, I think we do need to start aligning some of the, you know, some cross-sector collaborations, right? So within the Puerto Rican community, we have strong chambers, we have strong nonprofit organizations that are doing service work, some nonprofit and C4 and PACs that are doing great work in the civic engagement arena. How do we get all of these, you know, folks to work together and have a common agenda? And I've been part of conversations where that has been the goal, but without some, you know, investment from mainstream organizations and from funders, you really can't get anywhere, right? So it's conversation and happen, but you really need the resources to back it up and move that forward. I think we need more collaboration. I worked 10 years in the immigrant community and I learned just so much. And there are a lot of similarities, particularly on local issues like housing and wage and labor protection issues, education and health policy. There's just so many commonalities and interests, right, across these different Hispanic groups. We're not a monolith and we all have our different experiences and reasons for being here, but we definitely have, you know, some tela de que cortar. I forgot what how you say that in English, but we have a lot of commonalities and some work to do, and we could do this together, right? So we kind of have to get over the hurdle of we're so different. You have citizenship, or you have, you know, your folks are more likely to vote this way or that way. We really need to just work on coalition building across different Hispanic groups, and lastly, across different racial and ethnic groups, right? So coming from New York, I saw a lot more collaboration between Latinos and the Black community because similar histories of marginalization, right? So we need to help build a common agenda, right? We came together on some things the last election cycle. And, you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement, I think we came together on some issues around racism and marginalization and police brutality. So we just need to keep, unfortunately, because of a crisis, but we just need to continue to find those similarities and work together to build power.
So I don't want to cut you off, but we're about time. So thank you for that great insight. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Luis Martinez Fernandez. And Luis, you have the floor.
Well, good morning to all of you. Fernando Rivera, I want to thank you for this kind invitation, for organizing this. All of these things take time, logistics, and even money. And I also want to congratulate you on what you have done in the Puerto Rico Research Hub. I know you're somebody who doesn't like to toot your own horn, but it must be said that you have started this from scratch and done a great job, not just with an impact in the university, but with great outreach beyond the walls of the University of Central Florida. So thank you very much. Thank you for the audience for taking time to participate in this event. My name is Luis Martinez Fernandez. I am a professor of history at the University of Central Florida. I consider myself to be one of the luckiest people on earth because I'm able to earn a living doing what I love. And what I love is education. You know, in 1978, I was a freshman at the University of Puerto Rico. And I fell in love with the place, with higher education, with reading, writing, to the point that I've never left the classroom. All these years after that, I'm still in the classroom, teaching, reading, and also participating with the broader community. Now, there are some points that I want to touch, and one of them has to do with why education matters, and particularly in our community. Secondly, why does history and the humanities, why do they matter? You know, we live in times, and some of you have heard me use this phrase before, I may have coined it, but we live in times of an obsession with STEM. And sometimes I use the phrase STEM bullying, and I want to make the point that the humanities and the social sciences and the arts are the very epicenter of the university. And that's the way it should be. And I'm going to make a case for why that should be the case. Thirdly, I teach history of Puerto Rico courses at the University of Central Florida. I get to teach that course at least once a year, which is a great privilege. We do have so many students from Puerto Rico and other parts of Latin America that there's enough interest in those courses. And I often start the course by saying, well, why Puerto Rico? You know, in the scheme of things, Puerto Rico is a relatively small country. And why do we have a course here at the University of Central Florida that focuses on Puerto Rico exclusively? And I'll add a little bit to that point. And then lastly, what can still be done in our community to facilitate education, to expand? And I know my tocayo, Luis Martinez Alicea, and others are doing a great job in the area of promoting the arts and culture, various events. We need to do more in that area, and we also need to do more in terms of educational efforts in the community. The last thing I want to talk is about leadership, and I'll be very brief about that. So let me start with why education matters. I spent many years working with a college board, that organization that is best known for the SAT exams and also for courses such as advanced placement. I had the opportunity to learn a lot while involved in that organization. And one of the things that we learned is that education matters. Somebody who has a high school degree has a much greater, twice as much of an earning possibility as somebody who doesn't. Somebody with a bachelor's degree has twice as much of an opportunity to make a good income. It does matter. Now, I don't want to leave it at that level. It's not just a matter of income. It is a matter of learning to understand the world around you. That is so important. We just had elections and we see how important it is to have an educated public, a public that can understand some very basic things, such as the separation of powers in our government. Believe it or not, what the polls say is that maybe half of the population doesn't even know that. And the question is, how can we have a functional democracy if we ignore some basic principles like that? But it's also a process of self-fulfillment. Many people who talk about education emphasize, well, the job that you're going to be able to get. Yes, that's important. We all need to work and have an income, but it's important to keep in mind that an education is not just for a job. It's for individuals to fulfill themselves intellectually, to find the course in their lives, and to become citizens that contribute to society in a variety of ways. The other thing is that, people say, well, and I get a little bit defensive with this issue, well, people who get degrees in the humanities, and I'm an advocate for the humanities, don't make that much money when they graduate. Well, wait a second. This is not about your first job. This is about your last job and how much money and how happy and fulfilled you will be, not when you're 21 necessarily, but when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and even in the 60s, which I have just entered that category. The next thing I want to talk about is the history of Puerto Rico. As I said, Puerto Rico is a small island. It has a population of about 3.5 million people. It is shrinking, and it has been shrinking for a while. A few years ago, maybe I think the 2000 census, it was around 5 million. There are historical factors that explain that. For the first time in the history of Puerto Rico, we have had to use the term Puerto Rican refugees, and my colleagues have spoken to this before me. But Puerto Rico is also a land, well, the first explanation that I give my students is, well, we are in Orlando, in Central Florida, and we are surrounded by Puerto Ricanos and other Latinos. So just for the sake of functioning properly in this society and being able to understand others and have others understand you, it is important that we learn about our neighbors, which, by the way, we are on the way, Latinos in general, we are now 18% of the population in this country. So when are we going to wake up to that reality? Secondly, the history of Puerto Rico may not be dramatic. It is not a dramatic history, but that doesn't mean that it is not important. It is a history with many firsts and seconds. Puerto Rico was the second colony of the New World. It is the world's oldest colony as we speak. Puerto Rico just had the 6th plebiscite or referendum on November 3rd to try to finally determine the island's political status. Does it become a state? Does it remain a commonwealth as it is? Does that commonwealth get readjusted for more freedoms for the island? Or does it become independence? This has been going on for over 100 years, actually before the United States took over the island in 1898. Those were the formulas and the discussions. Now, I don't want to go beyond my allotted time, but I would just want to mention a couple more things. Let's look at Puerto Rico's location. Puerto Rico is located in an area which is a border of conflict. We see that even before the arrival of the Europeans. And as Fernando mentioned earlier, today is the so-called discovery of Puerto Rico. Not that I'm politically correct, because I'm not, but discovery is not the best term given what actually happened, which was more of an encounter. Now, the next thing that I'd like to mention is that Puerto Rico became, as small as it is, a model for worldwide development. And Puerto Rico's underwent many political transformations. I think it's worth mentioning, and I'm not political, well, I am, but I'm not going to be political today, but I think it's worth mentioning Luis Munoz Marin, who was the governor of Puerto Rico during the 40s, the 50s, and the early 60s. He is one Puerto Rican who appeared in the cover of Time magazine, not once, but twice. And he became, and I really wish we had leaders like that today, not just in Puerto Rico, but in this country. He's well known for sitting with the most humble people, speaking to them in clear terms, respecting them. Once he said, just lend me your vote. Don't give it away, lend it to me. And if we don't deliver, take it away. I'd love to have some of our politicians use that kind of logic and that message. And then lastly, I want to underscore the fact that Puerto Rico became a miracle of development. Think about this, industrialization. In Great Britain, it took over 100 years for that to happen, to go from a rural agricultural society to an industrial one. In the United States, it took about 50. In Puerto Rico, it was a matter of 10 to 20 years to transform a society completely. And that became a model that was replicated throughout the Americas. Countries like Chile sent their economists and government people to learn what had happened on the island. And then lastly, and I want to highlight this, back in 2016, when, last year, 2019, Puerto Rico gave the world a lesson in real democracy. A very corrupt governor and his associates, to use a kind term, were exchanging chats with very vile language, insulting, making fun of the people. Well, those chats emerged, and then that cost him the governorship, and the people of Puerto Rico marched. So it's not a violent society. It is not, but it is a society that in the last couple of years has taught us some very good lessons in democracy. As I promised, the last thing I wanted to talk about is leadership. Now, leadership does not mean that you have a leadership position. We all know people who have positions but are not leaders, and we know people who are leaders but don't have a position. Number one. Secondly, we need to strive and work hard to get not only at the table, but to get at the adults' table, not the kids' table. And there are different kinds of leadership, and I want to be very brief. You can be a Latino leader within a Latino scope. For example, you are a Latino journalist, an editor, and you work in a Spanish-speaking language newspaper, and you have a position of authority there. Fine, there's nothing wrong with that. You can also be a Latino and be, say, at the, this is not an advertising, but be, say, at the Orlando Sentinel, the English language paper, and then cover the Latino beat. Okay, that's fine. Somebody has to do it. But my point is that we will not be there, we will not make it, and we will not be able to help each other the way we should until we have Latino leaders who are in mainstream organizations and who have the possibility of not being just in charge of the Latino beat, but to be the editor of a newspaper. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Luis, for those remarks. And to the panelists, what an absolutely delight in different perspectives. I'm going to open the floor. So if you have any questions of people in the audience, you can put them in the chat and we can do so. But while that happens, I don't know if the panelists have any questions for each other in terms of some of the remarks that you made. Just sort of to begin the conversation, we have about 12 minutes or so. So I'm hoping that those people in the audience do have questions, put them in the chat. We'll read them out loud. But in the meantime, I don't know if you have any reactions to what the other panelists actually said.
I want to make a comment that I think is really, really important for our Puerto Rican community in order to be more proactive, strongest stronger community in Central Florida. I think that we need more unity. After the Hurricane Maria, we have been witness of the creation of many Puerto Rican organizations, but we need to identify like a cohesive efforts, plan and goal to work together about the issues that affects our Puerto Rican community. Because every single part of a puzzle is really important. Although we have so many Puerto Rican organizations, we need to identify that common denominator to work together for the benefit of the Puerto Rican community. I think that unity will play a critical role in this process.
Thank you, Luis. So we have our first question and anybody can take it out there. So what's your opinion on how to win the Latino vote, such as key issues and platforms?
I have a couple of thoughts on that. It is, of course, important to have platforms and programs that speak to our needs as a community. But I think above all else, the issue of respect is paramount. Sometimes we have politicians who, and Orlando is almost like a little planet, and we see these satellites, these political satellites, to come by every 4 or every 2 years and say something in Spanish, and we clap and we laugh, but then we don't see from them anymore. I think that's very important. I think the message, it's a paradox, because on the one hand, we know that the Latino communities are very diverse and very different. But then on the other hand, we know that there's certain cultural similarities. And I think it's not correct for the same candidate to come to Orlando with one message and then go to Hialeah with another message. You know, we do catch on those things. So I would underscore a sincere desire to understand us and to represent us in the halls of power.
Thank you, Luis. So the next question we have, in 2021, are there any initiatives to help the Hispanic community that has some military connections? Members, veterans, parents, spouses, children.
I wanted to add just really quickly, because I think we're getting kind of similar questions. I do think that cultural competence is important. You know, speaking to a New Yorican from the north that just, you know, settled in Florida recently versus someone who grew up in Puerto Rico. I learned this the hard way. It's not the same message, right? And you're not easily, you know, able to engage both communities with the same message. You know, I do think that we need to find commonality, but, you know, to a lot of the panelists' points, we just need constant and uninterrupted civic engagement and leadership development in our community, because what happens is groups will parachute in and out, right, and, you know, want to turn, you know, the Latino vote out, and it just doesn't work that way, right, because our community is so disconnected in so many different ways, right? And so if you're only, you know, connected to this one mainstream institution and you only hear from the Latino organizations when elections come around, you know, it's not going to resonate with them, right? Like, why am I going to get involved if I have this, jaded kind of experience with politics in my home country, whether you're Puerto Rican, Venezuelan, or whatever the case may be? For some, it kind of ignites a fire in them to be more involved, right? So I think that it's not, it's a very complex question or answer to that question, because we're so different. Our histories are different, even when you're coming from the same country. But I do think that whether it doesn't matter who you were going for in this last election, there was a lot of disinformation campaign, right? And folks started to kind of try to redefine, you know, democracy or, you know, democratic values versus Republican, and capitalize on some of the delicate issues and experiences, including trauma among Venezuelans and other folks, and, you know, really press that button and exploit that. You know, so I think that that's really dangerous, and we need to invest in educating the community long-term and uninterrupted, and developing that leadership and that information within our community, so that folks can't just come in and exploit, you know, based on the unknown or the fear or fear mongering.
Thank you, Zoe. So Luis Martinez from the city of Orlando, do you know of any initiatives to deal with military families in the Hispanic community?
Well, I know that Mayor Dyer has his Council of Veteran Affairs that provide to the mayor, city council, recommendation and advice on how to continue providing services to our veterans community. But I know that there are several Hispanic veteran organizations in Central Florida. We have two organizations in Lake Nona that I precisely talked to the president of both entities recently, because the Lake Nona Veterans Club recently hosted an event to honor our veterans here in Lake Nona. So I'll be meeting with them to continue strengthening the relationship between the city government and this organization. But yes, there are several Hispanic veteran organizations, and Mayor Dyer has his own council that provide recommendations to serve this community.
Thank you, Luis. We have another question. There was a lot of discussion about a shift of Cuban, Venezuelan, and other Latinx voters to the GOP in South Florida in this month's election. Did we see similar shifts in Central Florida and among Puerto Rican voters across the state and nation?
If I may, I've been studying the Cuban American vote and the Puerto Rican vote in Florida for several decades. And I think there's a wrong message in the interpretation and blaming Cubans really for Democrats having not won the state of Florida. Yes, it's true that one of the campaigns insisted on the message of the fear, the perils of socialism and communism. But if you do what historians and political scientists do, you go to the evidence. And when we compare the percentage of Cuban voters who supported the Republican Party this time around, it is not a major change from what we saw 4 years ago. It's roughly the same 55% or so. So that premise needs to be investigated.
And I would add also kind of like the preliminary exit polls and some of the data show that Puerto Ricans did have overwhelming support for the Democratic candidate, even though, again, it's not as simple as we think, but it seems to be that pattern out here, which is important sort of in the upcoming discussion for the status of the island as well. Zoe, you had something to add to this?
No, the last number I heard was about 72 to 75% of Puerto Ricans voted for Biden, was my understanding, but I'm not sure if that's scientifically backed.
Yeah, we'll still need to know. And we have a final comment regarding some of those issues. Politicians, those who govern, need to understand that Latinos are so diverse, even with their own respective ethnic groups, and that reality have always existed. They just don't know about it. Our votes have not changed. Their impact is felt on a greater way given the numbers of folks moving to our state, and more specific to the Central Florida area. We have about 2 minutes or so I want to give the opportunities for panelists to give any last remarks as we close the panel. And I want to thank, first of all of you for agreeing to participate, and all of those in the audience, make sure to follow this group of individuals, and also, keep in touch with what's going on at UCF Global, and also at the Puerto Rico Research Hub, the College of Sciences, and other places. So if you want to, I'll give the panelists the last word.
Dr. Rivera, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this virtual panel. It has been very great opportunity to us to discuss how can we continue empowering our Puerto Rican community in Central Florida. And the last comment that I have is, I think that I echo Zoe's comments about the education. I think that I have seen a lack of education in the Puerto Rican community about the local politics and how the government works. Because in Puerto Rico, we vote every 4 years, but here we are voting every year for the school board member, for the judges, other positions that we don't vote in the island. So the education is a key, and we need to work with all community organizations to provide this kind of orientations and workshops to the Puerto Rican newcomers so they can understand how the local politics works and how the local government works. Because we have city governments, we have counties. In Puerto Rico, we don't have counties. And that's confused a lot of Puerto Ricans residents because they don't know who is their mayor, if they're establishing their businesses, they don't know if they have to contact the county or the city government. So education is the key in order to empower our Puerto Rican community.
And with that great theme in terms of education is International Education Week. So thank you so much for great remarks from the panelists. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again sometime in the future in person, and send to everybody that participated today. So we are at time. We kept it at time, so that's exciting. So have a great rest of the week. We have Thanksgiving coming up as well. So enjoy that time, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.